The man lying on the stone floor has a sword wound that goes all the way through. Not a slash, not a graze. Through. You can see organs moving when he breathes. The year is roughly 158 CE. The city is Pergamon, in what is now Western Turkey. The arena smells of blood and sand and animal fat. And a young doctor, 28 years old, recently appointed physician to the gladiators, is kneeling over this man, making a decision. Everyone else in the room assumes the man is dead. Wounds like this are fatal. That is the consensus. That is what the books say. The young doctor does not care what the books say. He cleans the wound. He irrigates it. He reaches in, carefully, deliberately, and repositions the protruding intestines. He closes the wound. He bandages it. He does this not because he has been taught to, but because he has watched. He has spent years watching bodies, animal and human, and he believes, based on direct observation, that a man with this wound can survive if the repair is done correctly. The gladiator lives. This is the first important thing to understand about Galen of Pergamon. He was not just a theorist. He was, by the standards of any era, a brilliant clinical practitioner. He saw things other doctors refused to see. He tested ideas other doctors refused to test. The second important thing to understand is this. He was also wrong about almost everything. And his wrongness, his beautiful, internally consistent, magnificently argued wrongness, would hold medicine hostage for 14 centuries. This is the story of how one man's genius became the world's most expensive intellectual prison. Pergamon in the 2nd century CE is not a backwater. It is one of the great cities of the Roman Empire, a cultural capital, a seat of learning, a place where philosophy and medicine and architecture compete for attention the way social media companies do today. The city has a library that is the second largest in the ancient world. It has a famous healing sanctuary, Asclepion, where people come from across the Mediterranean to be cured through dreams, baths, and the intercession of the god Asclepius. It has marble everywhere and ambition to match. Into this city, around 129 CE, Galen is born. His father is Aelius Nikon, an architect, mathematician, and farmer. By all accounts, a remarkable man, cultivated, curious, methodical. He gives his son the best education the ancient world can offer: grammar, rhetoric, philosophy, mathematics. Galen studies Plato, he studies Aristotle, he studies the Stoics. He learns how to argue, how to reason, how to construct a case so tightly that no one can find the seam. Then, when Galen is around 16, something happens that will redirect his life. His father has a dream. In the dream, the god Asclepius, god of medicine, divine healer, the deity whose serpent-wrapped staff is still the symbol of medicine today, appears to Nikon and tells him that his son must become a doctor. Now, you can interpret this however you want. Maybe Nikon genuinely believed in divine instruction. Maybe it was the kind of dream that, in retrospect, feels like permission to do what you already knew needed to happen. Maybe Galen himself told this story later, having understood that a founding myth is useful. What matters is what happened next. Nikon reoriented his son's education entirely. Galen began studying medicine with the intensity of someone who believes he has been chosen. And in Pergamon, medicine meant the Asclepion, the healing sanctuary, the place where patients slept on temple floors hoping the god would visit them in dreams and prescribe a cure. This sounds like superstition. It partly was, but the Asclepion was also, in practice, a surprisingly sophisticated therapeutic center. Patients received baths, exercise, dietary restrictions, herbal treatments, and psychological care. The priests who administered these treatments observed outcomes. They noticed what worked and what didn't. They kept records. Galen absorbed all of it. He read the existing medical literature obsessively, Hippocrates above all, whose texts were by then 4 centuries old and already reverential. He studied with multiple teachers across multiple cities. He went to Alexandria, which was still, even in the 2nd century, the center of medical learning in the Mediterranean world. In Alexandria, Galen encountered human bones. There were no intact human skeletons in Pergamon. The taboos against handling the dead were strong. But in Alexandria, skeletons from earlier generations of medical study were still available. He handled them. He memorized them. He began to form a picture of the human body from the inside. He also began to form a picture of himself. Because here is the other thing about Galen. He was, by every account including his own extensive autobiographical writings, intensely, almost pathologically confident. He believed he was the best physician alive. He said so, directly, repeatedly, in print. He believed that other doctors were incompetent frauds who were killing their patients through ignorance. He said that too. He wrote detailed, vicious attacks on rival physicians. He called them donkeys. He compared them unfavorably to cooks. This arrogance was not baseless. He was, in fact, extraordinarily talented. But it would matter later. The confidence that made him a great diagnostician would also make him incapable of accepting that he might be wrong about anything fundamental. He returned to Pergamon in his late 20s. He needed a job. The best job available was the one nobody else wanted: physician to the gladiators. The gladiatorial games are not what most people imagine. They are not entirely about killing, not by the 2nd century CE. Gladiators are expensive investments. They require years of training, specialized diet, medical care. A dead gladiator is a financial loss. Promoters and arena owners want drama, not slaughter. Most gladiatorial bouts end with a wounded combatant surrendering, not dying. This means gladiators need doctors, very good doctors, doctors who can handle traumatic wounds, fractured bones, internal injuries, infections that develop in the days after combat. The gladiatorial physician is, functionally, what today we would call a trauma surgeon. Galen takes the job with an attitude that would become characteristic. He immediately considers himself better at it than anyone who had held it before. He's probably right. What Galen understands, what makes him exceptional in this role, is that the gladiatorial body is a text. Every wound is an opening. Every injury is a window into the machine of the human form. When a gladiator takes a blow and the flesh opens up, a physician standing in exactly the right place can see things that would otherwise be hidden: muscle layering, connective tissue, the relationship between organs, the way the body compensates when something goes wrong. Galen calls gladiatorial wounds windows into the body. He says this approvingly. He watches, he records, he treats, and his success rate is apparently remarkable. Later in life, he will boast that during his tenure as gladiatorial physician, he lost only 2 patients. Whether this is true or a characteristic exaggeration, the gladiators clearly recovered at a higher rate under his care than under previous physicians. And he learns. He learns more from those wounds than most doctors of his era will learn in a lifetime. But there is a limit. The limit is the human corpse. Roman law, Roman custom, Roman religion all prohibit the dissection of human bodies. You can study bones, you can observe wounds, you can watch what happens when the living body is opened by violence, but you cannot take a dead human and systematically cut it open to understand its architecture. This is the crack in the foundation of everything Galen will build, because Galen's knowledge of human internal anatomy comes primarily from animals: pigs, apes, goats, oxen. He dissects them extensively and brilliantly. He performs public dissections that are, by contemporary accounts, genuinely impressive as demonstrations of knowledge and technique. But pigs are not people. The internal architecture of a Barbary ape is close to human, but not identical. And when Galen extrapolates from animal to human, when he assumes that what he sees in the chest of an ape is identical to what lies in the chest of a man, he is sometimes right and sometimes catastrophically wrong. The catastrophic wrongs include the architecture of the heart and its valves, the structure of the liver, the path of blood through the body, the function of the kidneys, the anatomy of the uterus. He describes all of these based on animal anatomy. He describes them with extraordinary confidence. He publishes them in books that become the definitive texts of medicine for over 1,000 years. And most of it is wrong. The most consequential error, the one that will haunt medicine longer than almost any other, is his theory of blood. Galen believed that blood was continuously manufactured in the liver. He believed it was carried outward through the veins to nourish the body's tissues. He believed the blood was consumed by those tissues, used up like fuel, rather than circulated. He believed that the heart was not a pump, but a kind of hearth, warming blood and infusing it with pneuma, a vital spirit, before distributing it outward through the arteries. He believed there were tiny holes, pores, in the wall dividing the heart's two ventricles, through which blood seeped invisibly. No such pores exist. William Harvey will prove this wrong in 1628. For almost 1,500 years, medicine operates under a model of blood that is entirely, fundamentally incorrect. But the gladiators are healed, the wounds are closed, the patients survive. And Galen is 28 years old, brilliant and burning, and the greatest city in the world is waiting. Galen arrives in Rome around 162 CE. He is 33 years old. Rome in the 2nd century is not quite at its peak, but it is close. The empire stretches from Scotland to Mesopotamia. The city itself is home to 1 million people. It is dirty, crowded, violent, hierarchical, and intoxicating. For an ambitious man with something to prove, it is perfect. Galen comes armed with several things: genuine talent, extensive clinical experience, a combative personality, and an extraordinary gift for rhetoric. He gives lectures, public demonstrations. He performs dissections in front of audiences that include not just physicians, but philosophers, aristocrats, imperial officials. He is, by modern standards, a showman. But in the ancient world, this is not a pejorative. Rhetoric is a serious art. The ability to argue, to demonstrate, to hold an audience is a mark of genuine intellectual power. And Galen is exceptional at it. He demonstrates the nervous system by dissecting a living pig, controlling its squealing by cutting and releasing the nerve that governs the larynx. This stuns his audiences. He is the first to demonstrate, publicly and conclusively, that the brain controls the voice. The idea that Aristotle had promoted, that the heart is the seat of thought and sensation, takes a blow from which it will not recover. He demonstrates the function of the kidneys by tying off the ureters in a living animal, showing that urine backs up in the bladder. Simple, elegant, decisive. He wins the patronage of Marcus Aurelius, emperor and philosopher, the Stoic emperor who also wrote Meditations. Galen becomes physician to the imperial family. This is not just prestige, it is protection. In a city full of rival physicians and political intrigue, imperial favor is armor. He also makes enemies. Galen's method of conflict is direct, personal, and relentless. When he believes a colleague is wrong, he says so in public. When he believes a colleague is incompetent, he publishes a pamphlet explaining exactly why. He is insulted by other physicians and responds with escalation. He accuses rivals of practicing medicine they don't understand in pursuit of money. Some of this is fair. Roman medicine contains a great deal of dangerous charlatanism. Many of Galen's targets are legitimately bad doctors. But Galen's attacks are not proportional. They are not restrained. They are the attacks of a man who has decided that he alone understands medicine correctly and that everyone who disagrees is, at best, a fool. This psychology is important. Understand it because it will explain what comes next. Galen is a man who has built his identity around being right. Not just correct on individual questions, but architecturally, systematically, fundamentally right about how the human body works. His entire sense of self is fused with his theoretical framework. What does it do to a mind when being wrong is existentially unacceptable? It makes that mind look for evidence that confirms rather than challenges. It makes that mind dismiss anomalies. It makes that mind build systems so elaborate and so internally consistent that they become beautiful objects, things you don't want to break even when you begin to suspect they are wrong. This is what Galen builds in Rome. He writes, prodigiously, relentlessly. He writes more than any physician before him and arguably more than any physician after him for centuries. At his most productive, he is dictating to scribes simultaneously. His output is estimated at over 2 million words that survive, and much has been lost. He writes on anatomy, on physiology, on pharmacology, on pathology, on hygiene, on diet, on pulse, on the soul, on the nature of disease, on the nature of the physician, on the nature of truth. And gradually, across this ocean of text, he constructs something unprecedented, a complete, unified theory of human medicine. The Galenic system is, if you can set aside the wrongness for a moment, one of the most impressive intellectual achievements of the ancient world. It takes the ideas of Hippocrates, the four humors, the concept of balance and imbalance, the relationship between constitution and disease, and massively expands them into a complete explanatory framework for everything the human body does. Here is the architecture. At the foundation, the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. Every person has all four, in proportions that determine their temperament and their health. A sanguine person has abundant blood, optimistic, energetic. A phlegmatic person has excess phlegm, calm, perhaps sluggish. A choleric person has too much yellow bile, hot-tempered. A melancholic person has too much black bile, prone to sadness and introspection. Disease in this framework is imbalance, too much of one humor, or the wrong humor in the wrong place, or the right humor in a corrupted state. Treatment is restoration of balance through diet, exercise, and when necessary, through intervention. Bleeding to reduce blood, purging to remove bile. This is not entirely without logic. Inflammation does look like excess heat. Depression does have correlates in what we'd now call neurochemistry. The idea that constitution influences health is correct, even if the mechanism Galen proposed is entirely wrong. But Galen goes further, much further. He adds pneuma, a vital spirit that comes in three forms: natural pneuma, made in the liver and carried through the veins; vital pneuma, refined in the heart and carried through the arteries; psychic pneuma, perfected in the brain and distributed through the nerves. This gives medicine a spiritual dimension. The body is not just blood and flesh. It is animated by an invisible, hierarchical force. Illness is not just chemical imbalance. It is a disruption of the life force itself. For a civilization that does not yet have microscopes, chemistry, or any understanding of cell biology, this is actually a reasonable attempt to explain life. How does a body move? What makes it more than meat? Pneuma is Galen's answer to the hard problem of animation, the ancient equivalent of asking why some matter is alive and some is not. Then he adds the three souls. Following Plato, Galen divides the soul into three parts, each housed in a different organ. The rational soul lives in the brain. The spirited soul, emotions, passion, courage, lives in the heart. The appetitive soul, desire, reproduction, digestion, lives in the liver. This is why, in the ancient world, people who fall in love say they feel it in their liver. This is not metaphor. This is anatomy. The system goes further still. Galen develops an elaborate theory of pulse, different qualities of pulse corresponding to different disease states, different temperaments, different balances of humor. He writes 16 separate books on the pulse. 16. He describes the pulse the way a composer might describe music, with rhythms, characters, subtleties that require years of study to distinguish. He develops a pharmacological system that catalogs hundreds of plant, animal, and mineral substances and classifies them according to their qualities: hot, cold, wet, dry, in 4 degrees of intensity. Treatment means matching the quality of the drug to the imbalance of the patient. And all of this, all of it, coheres. It hangs together. Each part supports the others. The humors explain constitution. The pneuma explains function. The pulse theory provides diagnostic access. The pharmacological system provides therapeutic response. It is elegant. It is complete. It provides an answer for everything. That is its genius, and that is its danger. Because a system that explains everything cannot be falsified by observation alone. Whatever the patient does, gets better, gets worse, dies, can be explained by the framework. The patient recovered because the humors were rebalanced. The patient worsened because the intervention was too little or too late. The patient died because the constitution was too fundamentally disrupted. There is always an explanation. There is never a result that simply says, the framework is wrong. This is not a flaw in Galen specifically. It is a flaw in grand unified theories everywhere, in every era, including ours. But here is the thing that makes Galen genuinely complicated rather than simply wrong. Some of it was right.
The nerve experiments. Galen is the first person to systematically demonstrate the relationship between specific nerves and specific functions. He performs careful dissections and experimental ligations, cutting or tying off nerves at different points, and observes the consequences. He demonstrates that severing the spinal cord at different levels produces different kinds of paralysis. He identifies the function of the recurrent laryngeal nerve, the nerve that controls the voice. He correctly identifies that sensation and motion are controlled by different neural pathways. This is not trivial. This is observational neuroscience 1,500 years before the word neuroscience exists. His work on the pulse is, within its framework, clinically sophisticated. He describes dozens of pulse variants and correlates them with disease states. Some of these correlations are real, the relationship between pulse character and cardiac or respiratory disease, for example. He has no way to understand why they correlate in the terms we would use today, but the observations themselves are often accurate. His pharmacological work is substantial. He catalogs and classifies hundreds of medicinal substances and describes their clinical effects. Many of these descriptions are accurate. Many of the plant substances he recommends, willow bark for example, which contains salicylate, the precursor to aspirin, are genuinely effective. He didn't understand the mechanism, but the clinical observation was correct. He identifies the connection between diet and health with a sophistication that goes beyond most of what follows him until the 20th century. He understands that different bodies require different diets. He understands that age and activity level and climate all affect nutritional needs. He advocates for exercise as medicine with a specificity unusual for his era. He performs, and describes in detail, surgical procedures for wounds, fractures, and organ injuries that are clinically competent by any standard. His attention to prognosis, to predicting how a disease will progress based on observed symptoms, is exceptionally careful. He understands that medicine is not just diagnosis and treatment, but prediction. What will happen and when and why. His approach to prognosis influenced medical thinking for centuries after his death, and some of his prognostic observations remain valid. And perhaps most importantly, Galen insisted, consistently and forcefully, that medicine must be grounded in observation, not just in received wisdom, not just in philosophical speculation, in direct, empirical observation of the body. The great irony of Galen's legacy is that the principle he championed, look at the body, trust what you see, let observation trump authority, was precisely the principle that, when applied to his own work, eventually destroyed it. Vesalius looked, Harvey looked. They trusted what they saw, and what they saw did not match what Galen had written. Galen would, theoretically, have approved of their method. He just would have been furious at their conclusions. Galen dies around 216 CE. He is in his late 80s, an extraordinary lifespan for the ancient world, which he attributed, typically, to his own excellent medical regimen. For roughly a century after his death, his work exists alongside other medical traditions. It is influential but not yet dominant. Other voices compete. Then the Roman world begins to change. The empire fractures. Learning concentrates. Institutions, religious and political, begin to exert greater control over what is known and how it is known. In the Christian West, medical education narrows. In the Byzantine East, Galen's works are preserved and codified into authoritative compilations. In the Islamic world, which inherits Greek learning and massively amplifies it, Galen is translated into Arabic, commentated upon, and elevated to a status approaching scripture. Ibn Sina, Avicenna, builds his canon of medicine largely on a Galenic foundation. The canon becomes the standard medical textbook in both the Islamic world and eventually the Western universities of the Middle Ages. And in the medieval Western university, something important happens to Galen's work. It becomes doctrine. Not just highly regarded, not just influential, doctrine. To question Galen is, in the intellectual climate of medieval medicine, to question accumulated authority itself. Medical education consists largely of reading and commenting on Galenic texts. Clinical observation is secondary. Theoretical mastery is primary. There's a specific, famous story that illustrates this better than any abstract argument. In the 16th century, an anatomist is performing a public dissection, the kind of theatrical event that was part of university medical education. He is demonstrating Galen's anatomy from the text, while a barber surgeon does the actual cutting. The dissected human body does not match Galen's description. The anatomist's response? He says the human body must have changed since Galen's time. The human body changed since the 2nd century. This is what 1,400 years of authority does to the capacity for direct observation. It inverts the hierarchy of evidence. The text becomes more real than the body in front of you. This is the intellectual prison. And then, slowly, painfully, over the course of the 16th and 17th centuries, someone starts picking the lock. Andreas Vesalius, a Fleming working in Padua, publishes De Humani Corporis Fabrica in 1543. He has dissected human bodies himself, obtained at great personal risk and ethical compromise. He has looked at what is actually there without the filter of Galenic expectation. What he finds does not match. The septum of the heart has no pores, no invisible passages. The architecture of the bones is different from what Galen described. The uterus does not look like a pig's uterus. The liver does not have the 5 lobes Galen attributed to it. Vesalius does not entirely abandon Galen. The process is too psychologically difficult, the authority too great. But he begins to say, in print, that Galen was wrong about specific, verifiable things. The reaction is ferocious. Jacobus Silvius, one of the greatest anatomists of the generation before Vesalius, a man who had dedicated his life to Galenic medicine, publishes a response calling Vesalius a madman and a calumniator of the divine Galen. His argument is the one we have already met. If Galen said the body looks a certain way and the body does not look that way, the body must have changed. This is what a mind looks like when it cannot afford to be wrong. William Harvey publishes De Motu Cordis in 1628. He demonstrates, through a combination of anatomical observation and quantitative reasoning, the kind of bathtub arithmetic of how much blood the heart must pump, that blood circulates. That it is not manufactured and consumed, but driven by the heart in a continuous loop. That Galen's model of blood is entirely, foundationally incorrect. The response, again, is fierce. Harvey's practice suffers. Patients leave him. He is accused of madness. A colleague writes, in apparently sincere puzzlement, that Harvey can be heard stating his position, but no one takes him seriously among men over 40. No one over 40. Because by 40, you have spent your entire career inside the Galenic system. It is not just a framework, it is the architecture of your professional identity. To demolish it is to demolish yourself. And this is the deepest lesson in Galen's story. Not the specific anatomical errors, not the wrong theory of blood, but the broader phenomenon that his story represents. What happens when knowledge becomes identity? When a framework becomes not just a tool for understanding, but a definition of what it means to be a doctor, a scholar, a person of learning. The framework stops being a map. It becomes a homeland. And you don't revise your homeland, you defend it. Galen left Pergamon, that city of columns and healing in his father's dream, and went out into the world and changed it. He changed it more thoroughly, more durably, more pervasively than almost any individual in the history of medicine. He was wrong about blood. He was wrong about the heart. He was wrong about the liver and the uterus and the septum and the path of air through the body. He was wrong about things he had never seen. confident in his extrapolations from animals he had cut open on stone tables in a city he left behind. He was also right about nerves, right about pulse, right about drugs, right about observation as the foundation of medical knowledge, right about the relationship between diet, exercise, and health, right about prognosis, right about the intelligence of the living body and the physician's duty to understand it from the inside. He was brilliant and wrong and right all at once, in proportions that no clean moral separates. And then his ideas, the right ones tangled together with the wrong ones, became the answer, became the thing that could not be questioned, the authority that ended other arguments, the text that made bodies unreliable witnesses against themselves for 1,400 years. Stand in a medieval medical school and watch a professor describe the pores in the heart that have no pores. Watch a physician bleed a patient who does not need bleeding because the humors must be balanced. Watch a patient die of infection while the physician washes his hands in theory rather than water. And understand that this is not stupidity. These are often the smartest people in their societies, well-read, logically rigorous, intellectually serious. They are doing exactly what their training has taught them to do. They are reasoning carefully from their premises. Their premises are wrong, and they have no mechanism for discovering this because the thing that would correct them, direct observation over authority, was the thing that the authority of Galen had taught them to distrust. A system that perfectly explains everything is always the most dangerous kind. It offers the deep comfort of completeness. It has an answer for every objection. It requires no additions, no revisions, no humility. That comfort is precisely the thing you should distrust. Science, real science, the kind Galen himself claimed to practice, has a different relationship with wrongness. It does not treat wrong ideas as failures of intelligence or character. It treats them as information. Data about the edges of current understanding. Invitations to look more carefully. Galen looked at living bodies with more care than almost anyone before him. He saw things no one had seen. He wrote them down with such force and clarity and confidence that they became, for over a millennium, the last word on what a body was. He would have hated this. He would have hated being the last word. He would have hated a world in which students copied his texts instead of dissecting bodies. He wrote explicitly that a good doctor must observe for himself and not simply trust the words of his predecessors. He just never applied that principle to his own predecessors, or to himself. The most dangerous errors are not made by people who are careless. They are made by people who are brilliant and certain. Galen was both. His ghost still walks through medicine, not in the four humors, those are gone mostly, but in the psychological pattern he represents. In every generation of physicians who treated anomalies as exceptions rather than refutations. In every researcher who shaped their data to fit their theory. In every expert whose expertise became their prison. We still do this. We do it in medicine. We do it in economics, in psychology, in physics, in every field where a beautiful, internally consistent framework has been assembled by minds powerful enough to make it seem complete. The question Galen forces on every practitioner of anything is this: what is your septum? What is the wall in your framework through which invisible pores are passing evidence you refuse to see? The answer is probably not written in any of your books. You'll need to open something up,